手机为您报时，现在是北京时间晚上8点整。
Hello and welcome. Good morning and good evening. My name is Konstantinos Pagratis and I work for UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning and the coordination team of UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities. Thank you for being here today and welcome to today's webinar on participatory-based research and learning cities. Before we start, just a few notes on the session. Today, we will have 1 hour and 30 minutes to go, and this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the UIL YouTube channel. And a link to this page will be shared in the chat. The format for today's webinar is individual presentations followed by a Q&A by questions and answers. Each participant will have around 5 minutes to make their interventions, and the moderator of the event today, Mrs. Catherine Lido, will remind the participants of the time. Please note that the audience is muted and you are able to use the Q&A chat room to ask the questions. I would like to invite and to introduce our moderator for today, Catherine. Catherine, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Konstantinos. Thank you. So hello, everyone from around the world. Welcome, welcome. I can see you're already introducing yourself on the chat box, so thank you. Please continue to do that. I'll introduce myself in a moment, but first, let me thank you all for attending today's webinar, co-organized by the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities and the Pascal International Observatory Learning Cities Network. We continue to successfully build on the collaborations which emerged from the 4th International Conference on Learning Cities, which was held in Medellin in Colombia of October of last year. I can't believe it's only been 1 year since we were all able to be together. But we created this webinar series, and this is the 5th, to focus on learning cities, particularly in general, the thematic issues in general, but also as we continue to build in the COVID-19 recovery process. So today we're particularly addressing community-based participatory research and learning cities, offering a space for global dialogue on this issue. So we'll be promoting shared discourses on how we can be thinking globally and acting locally in order to address current and future learning cities challenges. So let me just introduce myself briefly and go through some housekeeping of today, and then I'll hand over to Raul, who, as you know, is the team leader for the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, who will then hand over for a welcome from our main speaker today, Rajesh Tandon, who is the UNESCO Chair in Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education and the founding president of PRIA, who will introduce his work and the panel. So as for me, who am I? I'm Professor Catherine Lido. I'm actually a psychologist. I'm a social psychologist and professor of psychology and adult learning in the School of Education at the University of Glasgow. But I'm also the deputy director of the Pascal International Observatory for Europe, along with Mike Osborne, who you'll hear from at the end of the day. And so my job as moderator is to take you through some housekeeping and make sure that we stick to time mainly. So just to note, yes, as Konstantino said, the webinar is being recorded, but only in speaker view. So your picture as a participant is not being shared. This entire video will be made available to you on the YouTube channel afterwards. So you can go ahead and share that link There is no certificate of participation, but there will be, you've got the agenda and you'll also have a summary of the presentations, and you'll have an opportunity to pose questions. So if you're looking forward to hearing more, make sure that you sign up to the UIL newsletter. Make sure that you sign up to the UIL YouTube, and ensure that if you wish to ask a question, you pose it in the Q&A box. And if you wish to introduce yourself, please do so in the chat box, okay? And when you introduce yourself, ensure it says all panelists and participants. So we're very, very excited to have these presentations from around the world, and very, very honored to be here to moderate the discussion. So I'll hand over now. My 5 minutes are up. Raul, please, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Catherine, for this introduction. Good morning, good evening, everybody. I would also like to welcome you to today's webinar on the topic of community-based participatory research and learning cities. This is already the 5th webinar that we're organizing at UNESCO UIL together with Pascal International Observatory. And this time, we feel very honored to partner with the UNESCO Chair in Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education. Really a pleasure to work with you, Rached. Community-based participatory research, as you know, is a collaborative process that equitably involves all partners in the research process and recognizes the unique strengths that each brings. It's a collaborative process. It's really bringing the voice of the community. The process begins with a research topic of importance to the community with the aim of combining knowledge and action of social change. The webinar today aims at highlighting 3 examples of the work of community-based participatory research undertaken by several research hubs from all over the world, and in partnership with the local administrators, community leaders, and also with other partners. Today, we will have the chance to witness how this type of research can benefit the community involved in the research and individuals in the community, but also how the community can help shape research, design, and ensure that the actual needs of the community are considered. That's quite important because in a way, it's really a research responding to the challenges of the communities, to the real needs of the community. It is true that individuals may have the opportunity to participate in research, and they would have known about except through a community organization. And through this process, the community may empower individuals to share their ideas and their concerns. Today, we will also hear the social impact of such research, such as the case of public schooling in South Africa, the case of planning and monitoring of sanitation services in cities in India, the platforms for social innovation by the University of Sassari in Italy, and the community education support to the community members during the pandemic in the city of Shanghai, with whom we have been working very, very close. We do hope that this event today will be able to spread the news that research is an important element, and it's not a particular element for universities, but for the community, for civil society organizations, including city administrations who are willing to create knowledge and change. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor back to our moderator, who will be introducing our first speaker, Mr. Rached Tandon, who is, as I said, the co-chair of the UNESCO Chair in Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education, but also founder of President of PRIA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you so much, as ever, for a wonderful introduction to the webinar series and to the day. So it is my absolute pleasure to hand over to Rajesh Tandon, who is going to talk to us about the work that he's done with Pascal and UNESCO, but particularly Knowledge for Change, the K4c Global Consortium. So Rajesh, we'll load up your presentation in a minute, but begin when you're ready. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Raul. Thank you, Constantino. Thank you, Mike. Thank you all. it's a wonderful occasion to be able to partner with you all, with Pascal, with Global Network of Learning Cities, with UIL, and all our colleagues from around the world. Next, please. I want to tell you the story of how I got to become a co-chair, because my co-chair, Dr. Bud Hall, who is in this slide, is based in University of Victoria in Western Canada, and it must be about 4 o'clock in the night there. We met each other 42 years ago in pursuit of alternatives to top-down, university-centric, expert-driven research, which did not produce solutions for local action. And we began to work together in a field which began to be known as community-based participatory research. I left my teaching job at Institute of Management in Calcutta and founded PRIA, which is about to complete 40 years next year. And participatory research in Asia became a network organization building this. In 2012, partly at the encouragement of our colleagues from UIL and from GUNI and friends like Mike, both of us landed up in 2009 Higher Education Summit of UNESCO in Paris, from where we were nudged to explore the possibility of becoming a UNESCO chair. We proposed that community-based participatory research has both an element of academic input as well as practice on the ground. And as Rahul explained much more beautifully and lucidly than I can ever do, thank you, Rahul. So the chair is a two-legged chair. One leg is with Bud in a university in Western Canada. Another leg is with me in India, in Delhi at PRIA. And I have promoted in last 3 years what we call Knowledge for Change Consortium. And I want to come to that quickly. Next slide, please. The purpose of creating Knowledge for Change Consortium was that we realized that next generation is not able to learn about methodologies of community-based participatory research in a real way. They either read theories about it or case studies, but don't practice, or they practice but don't systematize, don't conceptualize, don't theorize. So we came up with this suggestion that we could work where academic institutions could partner with city governments, with civil society, local community organizations to co-produce, co-construct knowledge, which, as Rahul so lucidly explained, starts from the research question that is focused on solving problems or improving the socio-economic situation of the community. And what you are going to hear today are examples from 3 such hubs, and we hope that with the participation of Jiaqing, very soon we'll have a hub in Shanghai as well, Jiaqing. Knowledge for Change. So next slide, please. It's basically a design where we have mentors, and mentors are practitioners of community-based research, both in communities, in city government, as well as in academia. And Bud and I, along with others, conduct a 21-week mentor training program. And then the mentors design their own future training and capacity building programs. These programs can be certificate programs, they can be inserted into a degree program, they can be an optional course, they can be housed in a particular water department or community education department or civil engineering department, as the case may be. Our interest has been that when mentors are training the next generation in each hub focuses on producing new knowledge, which can be solutions for local SDG priorities. We believe that sustainable development goals can only be realized location by location, not macro, but micro, local. And local priorities can only be solved with local knowledge in partnership with expertise. And this model is what we have been propagating. Next slide, please. We are delighted to share today. This is the design of the K4c Mentor Training Program, which we will share this and you can take a look at it later. Let me request for next slide, please, because I want to show you these are the current K4c hubs. We have 20 hubs in 13 countries, from Indonesia to Malaysia to India to, you will hear from India, you will hear from Sassari in Italy, you will hear from South Africa. We have 3 hubs in South Africa, in Durban, in Western Africa and South Africa. We have a hub in Tanzania, in Uganda, and also in Colombia, Cuba, and of course in Canada. So these hubs, we have already have 93 training mentors. We are currently completing the 5th cohort of mentor training program, and we will be launching the 6th cohort in March, and with new hubs as well as strengthening existing hubs. My appeal to you all is to look at these examples that you will hear from these hubs and think about ways in which cities and city leadership can take initiative in partnering with local research and educational institutions to produce knowledge which is of use to them. Cities don't have to wait. And I think Pascal and the global network of learning cities can promote knowledge building, knowledge use, knowledge mobilization, responsibility, and capacity of cities. And K4c Global Consortium will be happy to partner with all you cities anywhere, because we know in each city, as the pandemic has shown, there is an underbelly. There are those who have been left out, who are invisible, and whose needs have not been fulfilled. And I think city leadership is now going to redesign cities in future, and you may use this methodology to produce new solutions for the future. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Rajesh. That was incredibly inspiring call for mobilization and collaboration, and it was also bang on time. So thank you very much. Without further ado, we'll hand over to the first panel presentation entitled Weaving the Community Fabric from the Sassari Hub in Italy, Mr. Andrea Bargiu and Speranza Serra. Welcome. It might take a minute for your presentation to load, but you may begin.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, UIL, for hosting us, and of course, Pascal Observatory as well for organizing this interesting session. And Speranza Serra will not be able to participate today because of unforeseen reason and emergency. So she asked me, though, to read something for her in her place, on her behalf. So I understand that what we want to share is part of our experience here in Sassari, which is in Italy. It's on an island called Sardinia in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And what we wanted to share is part of our experience, notably as we are facing the pandemics right now, like everybody else in the world. So let me start with in this view. What we wanted to share is also how can we be able to move on with community-based research and with community action and with community change while the pandemic is ongoing, which is a very difficult question to answer because you are far away from people, and especially excluded people don't have access normally to electronic facilities and all the facilities that we know for getting in contact with each other. So the pandemic is hitting very hard on excluded communities. So what I want to concentrate in the first place is what we call PPI, Permanent Partnership Instruments. And this is what I believe can enable us to move forward and to have something that is always in place there for us to keep going. And first PPI that I want to present to you is this, because up to some 10 years ago, our architecture was rather simple. It was all resting on the FOIS laboratory, which is within the University of Sassari, which I coordinate, which had these three different things, teaching, research, and engagement. These are the typical missions, and you have the examples of what we do to fulfill these missions. But then in 2011, next slide, please, we started up a process that brought us eventually to have this architecture not only on one pillar, but also on a second pillar, which is a civil society organization that we set up with other civil society organizations with which we collaborated. We had been collaborating for a long time. So this took quite a while, but this enabled us to have a structural cooperation with CSOs, which was before rather on the basis of just projects. But now this is, since we have this instrument, this is structural. It continues over time. We also have enhanced flexibility, which is something that we need to work with communities, which is something that universities and institutions normally don't have. And we have a greater multiplication potential. So next slide, please. With this architecture, with these instruments, we went on the ground on a neighborhood which is called Santa Maria di Pisa. And we did it with the typical activities of community-based research, like community walks, asset-based analysis, community maps, and scenario workshops. And this led to an evolution and a work with the community partners and community members. Therefore, please let me introduce what Speranza, the text that was sent to us from Speranza, which gives us an idea of just one of these activities and one of the outcomes, and also her reflection on the present situation. So these are the words of Speranza Serra. What remains in the emergency of what has been woven so far? I understand this is the question. What had been done, we start from here. My name is Speranza Serra, and I've been working in Santa Maria di Pisa as a teacher for nearly 30 years. I decided to remain such a long time in this school because, despite all problems due to the critical social situation, the school was the only cultural presidium in the territory, a real barrier educational poverty in a region where, according to data from Save the Children Atlas of Childhood at Risk, more than 42% of minors have not read even a book in a year. Cultural deprivation in minors remains an alarming theme in Sardinia, where the share of culturally disconnected is almost 7 out of 10 minors. The first issue we found ourselves facing concerned the low participation of families in school life. While the children attended with enthusiasm, we wonder what was the perception that the parents had of the school. The answer was that they felt it was far from their real problems, closed in its own self-reference. The next and consequent step was that if the families didn't come to us, we would go out into the territory. As often happens, the decision to open the school for events involving the inhabitants of the neighborhood was not unanimous. Many teachers thought and still think that their role must be carried out only in teaching, leaving to other institutions, social services, or political bodies the task of taking care of the well-being of citizens. A group of teachers, on the other hand, was firmly convinced that in a complex and conflicting situation such as the one we had in Santa Maria di Pisa district, only a community pact could have multiplied educational resources. Community pact. I want to retain this expression. In a few years, these intentions became the official policy of the school. The role of the referent teacher for relations with the territory was established, and initiatives aiming at involving families, the municipal administration, and other associations multiplied. A network of collaborations has been woven that has led to the realization of numerous projects. Research on the history and cultural identity of the neighborhood with the photographic exhibition Santa Maria di Pisa in the Eyes of Children, interviews with the inhabitants, markets for self-financing creative activities for students, and to increase the book endowment of the school library. The school library played a central role in the organizations of each event, and over time, it has been transformed from the actual space into a place for the community. The structure, although located within the Instituto Comprensivo, is officially recognized as the neighborhood library and is part and is part, sorry, and is part of the Regional Library Center. The school, in fact, for decades had focused on promoting reading as a bridge between school and parents. The school library has been the starting point for all the activities organized in the extracurricular and community context. Today, thanks to the work of the whole educating community, the space is open to the territory. At least it would have been open if it weren't for the pandemic that forced us to close all activity on March 4th. We called it Bibliolab because this is what it wants to be, a laboratory that welcomes the proposal of the various partners of the network and multiplies their potential, a place to meet, relate, work, discuss and share, an opportunity for cultural growth for children, families, citizens. The objectives are those of scholastic recovery for students and adults, to enhance the informal and implicit skills present in the territory by implementing actions to contrast the demotivation and resignation that unfortunately afflict many young people. I will jump on to the conclusion. So we go back to the main question. What remains in the emergency, or what has been woven so far? In the emergency, everything stops. But relationships continue even if with difficulty. In Santa Maria di Pisa, we need presence. We have worked hard to be present. Virtual response for real needs does not work. In this situation of uncertainty and frustration, it takes the spider's patience to continue to weave the web for new opportunities to be created now in this non-passive time of waiting. These were the words of Speranza Serra, which lead us to the final slide. Can we move on? Because this is the pact that she was talking about. This is where we're starting from. This is what we have woven so far with the community partners. We call this PISA, Participative Platform for Social Innovation and Integration through Active Citizenship, which is another, what we call another permanent partnership instrument. Through this instrument, which was built through participation of community members, of citizens, of deprived people who were able to make their voice heard, to plan, to see the future, we set up this platform that is resting on 5 pillars that you can see there. These are our sustainable development goals. Each one of you can really recognize some of the SDGs that we have more popular, but these are the SDGs that we are building on, and these are the SDGs through which we can respond to the pandemic. Thank you.
Wonderful, Andrea. I think you were timing yourself there. That was pretty good, just a couple minutes over, but super interesting, and I think really starts to answer some of the questions that are being asked about how we can mobilize people and bring people together. But continue to pose some questions for Rajesh and Andrea on the Q&A box, and for our next panelists. We are moving swiftly to South Africa now, to the Durban Hub, who are going to talk to us about preventing dropouts in education. Mr. Darren Lorton and Diana Hornby, please, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, and good day to all. Context quickly: the UNESCO Institute for Statistics defines dropout as the proportion of pupils from a cohort enrolled in a given grade at a given school year who are no longer in the next school year. In South Africa, dropout has reached a national crisis. Approximately 60% of first graders will ultimately drop out and not complete the 12th and final grade. Put that differently, it's estimated that out of each 100 learners who start in grade 1, 40 will successfully complete the final exit level, and only 12 will gain access into higher education. Against this backdrop, some initiatives are being undertaken at Makanda, in which the Rhodes University is located, and we're going to be hearing about the wonderful things that they are doing there.
Thank you. Darren has shared the South African context. Now we will zoom into a city in Eastern Cape province of South Africa called Makanda. And this is where Rhodes University is located. Makanda is a city of around 80,000 inhabitants, and it has a very clear divide between marginalized and the privileged communities. Some of the finest independent schools in our country are located here, and some of the worst performing public schools are also to be found here. We can stay on the first slide. The focus for this presentation is a citywide education program, which I'm going to tell you about, and those are located in the public schools. 1,000, this is a zoom in on Makanda now, 1,200 children come into grade 1, which is the first year of schooling every year. 12 years later, 540 write matric and 180 pass. This is a 55% dropout in this city. So because of this dropout rate, the school principals approached the Vice Chancellor at Rhodes University for support in around 2015. And you'll see the overall goal of the Citywide Education Initiative, which is to collectively transform the local public schooling sector into a space where every child receives an education that equips them for a life of significance. Because of the dropout rate and the approach to the principals, we joined hands and we conceptualized a program called Reviving Public Schooling in Makanda. And the important point to be made here is because of the South African context, and Makanda in particular, the history of mistrust meant that we had to start with the building of relationships before we moved to CBPR. Next. I'm moving on to the key principles slide. I'll mention a few here. Authentic change, human development takes time, and a systems approach is very, very necessary. We have used in this initiative a multi-stakeholder approach, recognizing that no one organization will be able to make the kind of citywide impact that we want to realize. So we brought all stakeholders on board and worked with them from the very beginning. What we've created in the city is an education pathway for children. So we know 1,200 children come into schooling every day, and we track them as their education journey continues. We've used an asset-based approach. Historically in our country, very deficit approach, charitable approaches have been used, not recognizing the capabilities and assets that communities already have. So we've made a point of recognizing those and building onto those, which has brought much higher levels of ownership in the program. The last two principles I want to emphasize, the one is relationship building. It's just a non-negotiable if you really want impactful community university partnerships. And then because of the painful history in South Africa, it demands that healing and building trust is critical for community-based participatory research. Next. So I'm going to show you an infographic now, which will give you a very good idea of this pathway for children that we've created in the city. It moves from early childhood through to primary, to high school, to second chance schools, bridging programs into the university, and then working with key stakeholders, school leadership and parent engagement. And then because of the high dropout rates and only a small percentage make it into university, we've got alternative school pathways for young people in the city. You'll be interested to know that We spent most of our time in the first 2 years in the high school space because one of our goals was access into university. We soon realized though, because the education deficits happened a lot earlier, we then tracked back and negotiated with all our stakeholders as to how we could plug the gaps in the pathway and put more emphasis on the early childhood and the primary phases. In this country, at grade 3 level, 78% of children cannot read for meaning. So we knew that's what we would have to work hard on in order to minimize the dropout rates. The second chance schooling, that's for pupils who fail their final grade 12 year. And they get poor marks. So it's either to help them improve, to set them up for university, or it's to help them simply get a matric, which is the grade 12 certificate. The post-schooling pathways, if pupils drop out earlier, they have alternative career opportunities as we're dealing with the whole education system. Those include internships in local businesses, life skills programs, amongst social entrepreneurial and other opportunities that are open to them. Next slide. So the impact of the work over a 5-year period has been key successes in the building of rebuilding of trusting relationships in civil society and between the university and the community. It's also been very evident in the cooperation of the various state education stakeholders who used to compete with each other. That has turned to collaboration and cooperation now because we have shared goals across the city. Some examples of the success in the early childhood space is that legitimate community leadership has emerged. So we had the Early Childhood Forum come to us. Traditionally, this is a sector that has been very disorganized, but the forum came to us. They wanted to deal with the issues of water because there's been a great drought here. So they wanted to harvest it. They wrote a proposal and they simply wanted to access our networks. We put it out there, 2 banks came forward and they have led the initiative to install tanks in 53 preschools in the city. We have facilitated, not led, we facilitate, they led. So they're quite an organized body now. Move on for some of the other impact. 20% of our student body at the university is involved in weekly community development initiatives. That's the highest number we've ever had at the university. So the use of that social capital is very powerful. But I think the big one is in 2018, 3 of the high schools that we worked with got over an 80% pass rate. That's the first time in the history of our city that that's happened. In the same year, we had the highest number of grade 12s writing matric. In the same year, we had the highest number of grade 12s passing. That was 180 in that year. And we also had the highest number of bachelor passes in the history of our city. And that was 50% of the pupils that passed managed to get bachelors that year. So that was a huge indicator of success for us. Then the last point of impact that I'll share with you, in 2012, 11 young people came from these local communities into Rhodes University, got access. This year, 120 have accessed the university. So in closing, I think in South Africa, we cannot ignore our painful history and the effects of that history on relationships. So for us, we believe very firmly that you have to rebuild those trusting relationships before you can get back onto the work of community-based research. We're currently deep in dialogue with our community partners and negotiating questions around what we want answered and the solutions we want to find jointly. And that's how we will move together. I thank you all for giving me your time.
Thank you so much, Dai. And I was just going to ask you to wrap up when you move to in conclusions. So thank you very much. For the people following the agenda, we do have about 5 minutes slippage, so we're still on track. So thank you so much for what Rajesh rightly said would be an excellent case study in grassroots mobilization of multiple stakeholders to work collaboratively and longitudinally to address such a shocking, Darren, those were some shocking statistics, and Dai, some amazing impact. So we can't thank you enough for sharing a wonderful presentation. Moving on to our third panelist presentation, addressing issues of urban sanitation by the Priya Hub. I will attempt these names. The director of Priya, Mr. Kostav Bandyopadhyay, and also the president of the SIC Forum, Mr. Krishnan Kumar Joshi. Please, may you start your presentations for us.
Thank you so much, Catherine. A very good evening from Delhi, as well as from Ajmer, the two cities that we will be talking about. And primarily, I'm making this presentation, but I will also invite my co-researcher, Krishna Kumar Joshi, who represents one of the informal settlement committees, as well as a citizen forum that we have been able to develop in the city of Ajmer. My presentation will focus on the issues of urban sanitation and how people from the informal settlements in the city of Ajmer, which is in the state of Rajasthan, in the western part of India, have been able to access urban services, urban sanitation services, by engaging with the municipalities. Next slide. So before I do so, I thought maybe we can remind ourselves some of the chosen characteristics of the learning city, which have some bearing with the story that I'm going to present today. It talks about the principle of inclusion. And the whole story that I'm going to talk about is the process of enabling inclusion of the informal settlement dwellers in the city decision-making process. The other characteristics that are important, one is that a learning city revitalizes learning in families and communities. And we'll show you how the families and community members from the informal settlements learned to engage with the city authorities by using participatory research. It also mobilizes resources to promote inclusive learning and foster a culture of learning throughout the life. So we, in fact, fostered an intergenerational learning by involving the young people from the informal settlements, who then engage not only with the elderly people within the informal settlements, but also with other stakeholders in the city. And it facilitates learning for and in the workplaces. And as you know, that the informal settlements are not only places for residences, but also places for what for many residents in the informal settlements. So we'll try to sort of use these characteristics in the story that we are going to tell you in a moment. Next slide, please. So what are the processes that marginalizes the urban poor in Indian cities? And perhaps this could be true for other cities as well in many other countries. So first of all, what we have observed that the undercounting of both informal settlements and also the households living in those informal settlements lead to the exclusion. And these exclusions are manifested in multiple ways. Primarily in accessing urban services by the urban poor community. The lack of access to information and organizations often results in lack of voices in decision making. And this is so true for the urban poor, where they are excluded from the decision making in the city governance. The fourth process that marginalizes is the lack of accountability by the city authorities towards the urban poor. And that often leads to denial of rights and entitlements. Although those rights and entitlements exist on paper, but in reality, accessing those rights and entitlements becomes very difficult for the urban. The process that perpetuates the margin of is that many times the middle class are dependent on the services provided by the people who are living in the informal settlements, but they do not like to see the slums in a city. And they while they want to get those services from people, but often it is hard for them to accept the fact that those informal settlements in the city and influencing the city decision-making process. Next slide. Next slide, please. So we implemented a project called Engaged Citizens Responsive City. The slide before this one, please. So this project was implemented in the city of Ajmer, which has a population of little over 500,000, and it has little over 100,000 households. And at least 1/5 of the households are slum households, so which we call informal settlement households. And administratively, the city is divided into 60 wards, and there are 125 informal settlements. But if you see the official records, when we started this project, all the official records indicated that there are only 83 informal settlements. Then we get involved with the informal community and with the municipalities to undertake this participatory enumeration survey, and it shows the gap in counting of the informal settlements, as well as counting of the number of households in each informal settlement. Next slide, please. So we designed a process where we started with mapping of the city and identified all the informal settlements in a city, and then organizing the urban poor through what we call settlement improvement committees. The settlement improvement committees were then trained, particularly the young boys and girls within those informal settlements were trained for assessing the sanitation services through a participatory research process called participatory settlement enumeration, where all the households were counted in that process and the access to services were assessed in the process. Based on that survey, then we prepared the settlement level, what we call SSIP, Sanitation Service Improvement Plans. And that plan becomes the basis for negotiating with the municipalities. So it's a evidence-driven, data-driven engagement with the municipalities, with the municipal councillors, the city decision makers, to highlight the services gap and how those gaps can be filled. And so municipalities process of implementation of the program started, the SIC members, they themselves monitor the service improvement, and therefore there is a constant engagement in collecting data, analyzing the data in a collective manner within the community. And at the end of the process, the city level monitoring was done by the SIC forum. What we did that when in 125 informal settlements, each settlement had one settlement improvement committee. They were stitched together to form a city level forum. And that forum then engaged with the municipalities. The next slide, please.
Gustav, just so you know, you have about 1 minute to finish up, if that's okay.
Just half a minute, and then maybe to Mr. Joshi to talk about that, how these have been working during the time of in 2 minutes.
Okay,
so when is participation enabled and inclusive participation and inclusion enabled? Citizens, when citizens are informed, when they are organized, they have a voice and choice, and when citizens have the access to institutional spaces which are inclusive and fair. जी बताइए कि कैसे हम लोगों ने अजमेर शहर में पैंडेमिक के समय जो SIC फोरम है किस ढंग से काम किया है योशी.
And also your sound is breaking up a little bit.
I think
so
he will speak.
I think we can't hear you all that well. So maybe it's a good timing to
Can you
hand
hear
over.
me now?
It's coming in and out. So let's let's give it a final try.
Yoshi, I see. Okay. Yoshi.
I think it might be good to hand over to your colleague and see if maybe we can hear Mr. Joshi. No, I think we might have lost you altogether. So what we could do, I think, is maybe move to our final presentation. And if we get Kostov back and Mr. Joshi, then perhaps we could return after our final presentation. How about we do that? If you can hear me, Kostov, or maybe Mike will type those instructions in the chat box. And what we'll do is we'll move to our final presentation and see if we can fix the sound issue so we can hear Mr. Joshi and the rest of the Priya presentation. So if we can move now to our final talk, Mr. Jia Chang Li, Deputy Director of the Shanghai Municipal Institute for Lifelong Education, which has a wonderful acronym of SMILE. And so we'll have our final presentation from Shanghai, and then we'll see if we can return to our colleagues in Priya. Please proceed. Sorry, you're on mute. You need.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hello. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah. Good evening, every friends from the world. And I am Jia Cheng from Shanghai. It's very good to work with you. And just this evening, my colleague, Dr. Jiang Na, is working with me too. And I know there are some colleagues from Sichuan or other provinces in China to involve into this webinar. So I think this is a very important way to communicate with each other. And I am talking about the topic about the community education, how to support the community members in pandemic. So next slide. Thank you. I am from Shanghai. Shanghai is the biggest city in China. It has over 24 billion people. So you visit Shanghai, you can find so many people in the street, in the community. And just in this very big city, there are over 200 in the city. So the community is very important for everybody, for every people in Shanghai. And now I am working for SMILE, Shanghai Municipal Institute for Lifelong Education. Next slide, please. And just today, I want to share what we are doing, how we conduct the research about the community education in Shanghai. Actually, in different years, we are working with educators in different communities in Shanghai to find out the knowledge, to find the good ways to help the people in Shanghai. So next slide, thank you. So next one. Oh. Yeah, so just today, I want to talk about 5 topics, 5 points. The first one is about the background, and then the research problems, and then the theoretical foundation, research methodology, and the last one is about research conclusions. So next one, please. Just for the background, you know, in China, it's a very developing country. So especially in Shanghai, the city is developing so quickly. And just with the process of the urbanization, and the community is becoming more important. And the community people are learning to adapt to the new community lifestyles and are paying attention to the community's life quality. Just focusing on this community topic, many disciplines or many experts are doing the research about it. Today, I am just focusing on the community education, because this is the research area for my colleagues and I. And the next slide, please. Today, I want to put forward 2 research questions. The first one is, what experience has been connected in promoting community development through community education just during the pandemic period? This is the whole challenge for the world. So what we have learned, what we have done. The second one is about how to develop the community education in the post-pandemic period. You know, just recently, we have a very good way to control the virus, to control the pandemic. So we are doing the preparation for the next stage. And this research is related to many different theories. So next slide, please. Just focusing on this topic, we are related the research to the theory of lifelong education, because we are doing the research in this area, and we are working with UIL friends, and Shanghai is a learning city too. We're also focusing on the theory about the crisis and education, especially the scholars from the German. He had a very good thinking about the crisis related to the people's development. I think it's very suitable to think about the pandemic. And another one is about complexity theory, especially the scholar named Edgar Morin from France, because the complexity theory or thinking is very suitable to in this situation. On the other hand, we have some thinking about Chinese tradition, about caring theory, about enlightenment theory. So I will not say more about it. And next slide, please. So how we conduct the research? You know, we have conducted some seminars, we collected some data, and we visited some community schools. Just by this way, we have some conclusions. So please, next one. So please, the next one. And I want to share such research conclusions. The first one is about community education is so important to help the people to cope with, to fight the virus. How to say about it? The first point is about caring, because we have over 200 community schools. The educators are keeping in touch with all people in different communities. So, you know, during the crisis, many people are doing the policy of self-isolation. So we are afraid about it. We may feel lonely. So how to do with it? Community actors, educators are caring about the people, connecting everybody in different communities. For example, we have Changning District Community College, and this college kept in touch with 16,000 students and 500 staffs during the pandemic. And we have another town named Yangjing Community School. This school kept in touch with 5,000 students during the pandemic. It's so important because in the pandemic, everybody should be cared and educators can do it. This is the first point. And the second point is about confidence. Please, next one. About confidence, because community educators can share more information with the people, and the people can get the news about the pandemic, about the fighting, so the people can get the confidence from the educators. The third one is about responsibility, because the educators are trying to encourage the members to involve into the fighting, to involve into the caring or other self-help. So just by this way, the family, the community, or the service learning have happened. The last one is about learning, because the community educators or community schools are conducting more classes for more people. So everybody can learn by the website, and now even they can visit the schools. So this is the first one. I think the community education is valued, is very important in Shanghai. The second one is about community education shows its importance in the crisis and have gained the development experience. So next one, please.
Mr. Jiacheng, Lee,
yeah.
Would you finish up in maybe another minute or so?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
So we have got a very good understanding about community education because it's a new form of learning, of teaching. So we value it just by this research. So this is the second one, and the last one, please. The last one is about the new challenges and the development issues of the post-pandemic period. Just by learning or by the research, we learned the community education is very important, but we have some challenges too. For example, how to connect the community schools with primary schools, with university schools, how to renew the policies. So all these issues may be discussed in the future. So I think we have more ways or more spaces to do the research about the community. So thank you very much, and I welcome you to Shanghai in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. We would love to visit Shanghai when it's possible. And as a psychologist, I love that caring is considered a theory, a methodology, and a finding. I thought it was a really lovely presentation. So we'll just hand back now and see if we can bring in Mr. Krishan Kumar Joshi to finish up on the Priya presentation. Hopefully our connection's a little more stable. Let's try. Can you hear us?
Joshi ji, unmute.
Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Krishan. Let me try to ask you to unmute. So you need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hello.
Speaker on कर लीजिए जोशी जी. हाँ, अब ठीक है.
धन्यवाद. हेलो.
बोलिए. हेलो मत करिए, बोलिए, पूरे बिना रुके हुए बोलिए.
मैं कृष्ण कुमार जोशी, अध्यक्ष अजमेर बस्ती विकास समिति फोरम. ऐसे पिछड़े अतिवंचित गरीब परिवार जो कि अक्सर जानकारियों के अभाव में अपनी मूलभूत सुविधाओं से वंचित रह जाते हैं, उन परिवारों को समाज में ऊपर उठाने तथा उन्हें उनका अधिकार दिलाने के उद्देश्य से हमने प्रिया संस्था के सहयोग से एक समिति गठन किया, जिसमें अजमेर शहर की 100 बस्तियों की विकास समितियों में से मेहनती और सख्त सदस्यों का चयन किया गया. उन चयनित सदस्यों में से चुनाव प्रक्रिया द्वारा 25 फरवरी 2018 को एक विकास समिति बनाई गई. यह समिति तब से अब तक बस्तियों के विकास व उत्थान के लिए निरंतर कार्यरत है. हमारी समिति का मुख्य उद्देश्य समुदायों की आवश्यकता तथा अधिकारों के बीच तालमेल बिठाना, आत्महित सूचनाओं और विचारों को साझा करना तथा समिति के सदस्यों को सक्रिय और संगठित रखना है। समिति द्वारा विभिन्न बस्तियों की समस्याओं और मुद्दों को नगर निगम या संबंधित विभागों के समक्ष प्रस्तुत किया जाता है तथा उनके निस्तारण के लिए निरंतर प्रयास किया जाता है। समय समय पर समिति द्वारा विभिन्न बस्तियों में सामाजिक व मनोरंजन कार्यक्रमों का आयोजन किया जाता है, जिससे बस्तियों में नागरिकों व प्रशासन में आपसी समन्वय बना रहे। इसी चरण में हमारी समिति के सदस्यों ने प्रिया संस्था के सहयोग से अनुभव और अन्य जानकारी हासिल करने के उद्देश्य से झांसी व मुजफ्फरपुर शहरों का भ्रमण भी किया। हमारी समिति द्वारा अजमेर शहर की विभिन्न बस्तियों में परिवारों का आधार कार्ड, राशन कार्ड, जन आधार कार्ड, मतदाता पहचान पत्र बनवाए गए। उज्ज्वला गैस योजना के तहत चयनित परिवारों को गैस कनेक्शन दिलवाए गए। जिन परिवारों के घरों में बिजली कनेक्शन, पानी कनेक्शन नहीं थे, उन्हें कनेक्शन दिलवाए गए। घरेलू कचरे से जैविक खाद बनाने के लिए लोगों को प्रेरित करने के लिए उद्देश्य से बस्तियों में जगह जगह कंपोस्टिंग पिट बनवाए गए। कचरा प्रबंधन, सिवर लाइन, स्मार्ट सिटी प्रोजेक्ट में भी बस्तियों की समस्या मुद्दों को रखा गया। कोविड-19 महामारी के तहत
I think we need some translation in English, and I thought we would have a pause here. Rajesh or Kostov, would you be able to translate for the English-speaking audience at this point some of what was said?
Catherine.
Thank you.
I have written
Sure.
I have written 2-3 sentences in the chat box already. Kostov can do a little quick translation.
Basically, he is saying that he is representing SIC Forum from Ajmer, who is working in partnership with Priya, and the SIC Forum have been supporting the community to access basic services like water, sanitation, electricity, and other entitlement documents for the community members. And they have been continuously engaging with the municipalities to get those services and other governance institutions to access their entitlements. Joshi ji, आप बताइए.
I don't wish to cut off the discussion. So what I might ask is that if we're going to have the full speech, what we can do is we can have the Hindi and the translation in our UNESCO summary. But I realize that time is very, very short. We've gone over by 6 minutes already. So thank you, Mr. Joshi, and I am sorry to cut it short. I thought it was going to be a simultaneous translation. So what we'll do is we'll have the full speech with the translation in the summary of the event, and we'll post that along with the full video recording of the event. But I'm very mindful that we are running into our question and answer time. So please, please note we do not offer certificates for these UNESCO webinars. We do offer the video, which will have the slides in the video and the full summary with further references. Can I now open the floor for some questions? Mike, you might need to resend them to me because obviously I have all the other panelists chat in here. But maybe I can start off with our very first question that was posed from a gentleman in Kenya. And I'll take that one to Rajesh first. I believe the question was, and all my questions have disappeared, it was about, I think, mobilizing excluded, marginalized persons in countries of deprivation, in poorer countries. And we've touched upon it, Rajesh, but do you want to launch right into some practical ways that we could engage people from marginalized communities and in poor countries?
Thanks, Catherine. I think the question was, as I understood that, people in poorer communities and marginalized households don't see the value of getting involved in research. They are afraid. They think this is the job of the expert. And I think as experts, as professional researchers, we have created that impression ourselves. So for them to share their questions, a condition, almost safe learning condition, safe learning space, as all of us in the lifelong learning spectrum know, has to be created for them to feel comfortable, to raise their concern, to share their voice about what is not working for them. And from that, help them articulate the research questions that need to be addressed. Even for them to share any knowledge they have, they need to be comfortable in a space. And this is where social learning, learning space, safe learning spaces through a process over a period of time has to be created. We can't just go there as some journalists do these days, take the microphone, put in front of a poor person and say, what's your research question? And he will say, ooh. So, you have to invest time and effort. Dee said, build a relationship of trust before they will say, this is what bothers me. Can this be studied?
Sorry, just finding my unmute. That was a beautiful answer, Rajesh. I think trust is key. I would like to open it up to any other panelists who might want to join in. I know that Andrea and Kostov touched upon these areas. Would someone like to unmute themselves?
Oh, yes, Catherine. Well, I cannot but subscribe to Rajesh's words. And this relationship of trust takes time and leadership. And this relation must be, first of all, equitable. So it takes respect. It takes respect for other forms of knowledge that are not recognized officially as legitimate as the researcher's knowledge. So it takes humility, first of all, on our side. And this is not an add-on to our work. This is embedded in our work. This is the very nature of what research is about. It's about humility and confronting with other forms of knowledge and being able to understand, to listen to others before telling them what is right or what is wrong.
I think that's a wonderful add-on. And before we move to the next question, Kostov, do you want to say anything else about?
I think both Andrew and Dr. Tandon have beautifully sort of underlined the importance of trust and respect and humility. I think in all our projects, in all our efforts, we have been able to work with the community from their perspective. The starting point was that they identified the problem, and then we designed both the research and the intervention with the community. So listening to the community, having that patience, identifying what's the community at present, and working towards the future in building the community leadership and communities organization in the process has been very fruitful, at least from our perspective and from our experience.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I think our next question will move to Shanghai. Oh, sorry, Diana. Sorry, Di. Would you like to respond to the first question? Please jump in.
I would. I think that sometimes we misunderstand the question of who is development for. And we think it's really for poor marginalized communities. So it's about when we do research, picking up those communities and getting them to a certain level. And we don't think enough about the unlearning and the relearning of our part as universities and academics going into those spaces. So I think if we can understand that development is for all of us, we have as much to learn from about how we approach those spaces as that community has in growing in confidence to meet us at that level, that we can work jointly.
I think that's a wonderful point. It sort of ties on to the next question, which I have here, which is about how the role that universities play in terms of community-based work, and what types of leadership, if anything, universities need to engender in order to make that happen. Maybe start with, well, Dai, since you're already speaking about that, and then we can come to Jia Chang. So the role of universities, Dai, did you want to elaborate?
Yeah.
Or Jia Chang?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. I think it's a very good question because I am from university. I know the university has the responsibility to the community. So I think there are quite a few ways The first one may be from the people from the university. For example, in Shanghai or in China, many professors, many students are working with community members and to conduct the service learning. So I think there is the awareness of the university. And another one is about the government and the community force. Because in China, in Shanghai, community members are always inviting the professors or students to involve into the education, to social work, to some well-being work. So I think the invitation from the community is quite important for the partnership, and the government support is very important. Maybe the policy can create a space, a very good bridge for the community and the university. Actually, I have learned something from the speaker. Yeah. So, yeah. So just now.
That's lovely. It could act as a bridge.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, it was lovely. Thank you. And would anybody else like to share their thoughts on the role of universities and responsibility and leadership, that style? Yeah, Dai.
Yeah, I think the universities have a developmental role to play. I think they've got to grow the next generation of socially conscious students. You know, traditionally, we might have educated students for economic reasons, preparing them for a particular job. But it's so much more now that we have to, you know, grow and educate students for, to be, you know, much more holistically, and to be able to be these change agents in society. So I think there's that social responsibility universities must take on, even beyond the social and economic development that they need to be a critical part of in working with communities to solve local challenges.
I think that's great. And I don't want to cut off discussion because I'm sure Rajesh could say much, much more about as the UNESCO chair. But can we move to the next question? That last question was from Leota Scott, and the next is from Balash Nemeth about social media. So Balash asked it in a particular Indian context, but I might open it up to the team. In thinking about how to engage and mobilize young persons in community change and community research, what might be the role of social media from your particular cultural perspective? And I'll just let whoever wants to unmute themselves and jump in first.
Well, let me start. I think social media can play a great role in connecting the community youth. But we also need to acknowledge the digital divide, which is a reality in many parts of India. It doesn't stop us anyway to use technology to accelerate the mobilization of the young people. And that's exactly what we have done in many of these informal settlement communities, using smartphones to collect data, using technology to analyze the data, and the community youth were trained to do that. And ultimately, they became the owner of that data and evidences, and based on which they started interacting with the other stakeholders. But they have also used social media platforms, and particularly, you know, Facebook, which is very popular among the young people, and they have their own. Every citizen forum has its own site. They have been interacting through social media platforms. So it can augment the physical mobilization, but I'm not sure whether they'll be able to work in isolation. You know, only online mobilization might not lead to the emancipation or the kind of mobilization we want to see.
I think we're losing your sound again, Kostov. It was
I
such
don't
a
know
great
what happened
answer,
to
but we're
this.
losing you again. But I think the answer about mobilizing and facilitating the potential of it, although, you know, with the obvious risks, but seeing it as a way to reach young persons. Would anybody else like to come in with a different cultural context? And yes, I will save time at the end for Rajesh and Mike to wrap up, but we do still have time if anybody wants to jump in from their own cultural context. And then we have a final question, but any other thoughts on social media? No. Okay, I think our final question then, before we head to the wrapping up, is specifically for the South African team, but again, it might have wider implications. It comes from Jay De Loreto, and it is, what do you think are the main problems that hinder the success of educational programs in terms of, in the African context, using your key principles and strategies? We can see that it looks effective. We can see that when it's working, but what are the hindrances to actually putting all of those checks and balances in place, South African team?
Shall I try?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm okay. So for me, I think especially South African universities need to be cognizant of the way our past so affects our current situation. You see, universities are in society, and society is in universities. When about 40 or 50 years ago, the architects of apartheid put things together, one of the first things they did is to make sure that you offer certain universities for certain race types. And then they invested deeply in ensuring that that is entrenched, and it remained, quote unquote, successful, meaning serving their purposes for so long because they had an agenda, and the agenda was separate but equal. In the transition that took place, we haven't spent enough time, energy, and money in disinvesting the mentality. Yes, we tell ourselves we've rid ourselves of apartheid, but as long as the social strata of our country is represented in the milieu that constitutes a university, both in terms of student and staff, then the elite, and to some extent I'm part of that, are continuing to drive the agenda for those who they think require it. And they are, in my view, and I might be affecting my chances of promotion going forward, but in my view, there are very few vice chancellors who really understand that education is not just about awarding a certificate to a student as he or she walks across the stage. It's about making meaningful and deep changes to the psyche of community and society. And when you do so in partnership with them, then they are making contributions to our notion of education, which at this stage is so one-dimensional, it's scary. And I must add a point. One of the reasons why I enjoy working with Dai is because she has worked for two of the most liberated vice chancellors in recent times, who understand that the university in community is equally important to the idea of the community in the university, and recognize that both have a role to play in ensuring that we remain in partnership. It's at the risk of oversimplifying it, it boils down to, what are we actually doing? And are we doing it well? And are we the only ones asking ourselves, what are we doing? And are we doing it well? When we become risk averse and ask the society that we claim to represent, listen to their answers. It might be telling. I don't know if I've answered the question, but these are the thoughts that first came to mind when I heard it.
I thought you answered it beautifully. And as a psychologist, I recently heard that psychologists too much are telling people what they need and not asking, you know, what can we do for you? So I just think that was a really beautiful way to end. Mike points out that we have lots of amazing questions. We have one from Fabian about funding and what's going to happen in terms of COVID, and we've got a question from Emma Seddon, one of my researchers, about Indigenous languages and the role of that in research. And I genuinely think this conversation could go on for another hour. And so we might need to have a follow-up in this series. But I realized that we are running short of time. We've only got about 6 minutes. So I'm wondering if we could move to Rajesh for his final thoughts and Mike for his final thoughts, but if anybody wants to stay on afterwards for further conversation. So Rajesh, your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Catherine. Darren gave a beautiful answer, beautiful response. I just want to make one point in relation to the conversations which began. We need to return to the notion that higher education and institutions of higher education serve public purpose, not just private gain for individual students to achieve or individual researchers to make patents. And whether it is teaching or research, it has to serve a public purpose. Preparation of our students in the next generation to be global citizens, UNESCO's call to be global citizens, must be embedded in the education process, in the way they learn at college and school, but also in universities. And finally, the question of social responsibility of higher education, of universities, is for too long has been ghettoized in a small corner, separated from the other two missions of teaching and research. I think the pandemic has shown us that societal convergence of all three missions of university is the need of the hour. And therefore, social responsibility has to be construed in what we teach, how we teach, what we research, how we research, and how we produce and use knowledge for the public purpose. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful words, a call to action and summary at the same time, Rajesh. Thank you so much. Moving on to Mike Osborne, who is Director of Pascal International Observatory for Europe. And Mike, your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Another wonderful webinar, and can I thank everybody for their presentations. As Catherine says, we could have carried on for a lot longer. I've taken a few notes here. I've been also at the same time trying to send questions to Catherine and multitasking, which isn't something that men are supposed to be able to do, but I tried my very best. A lot of the emphasis today was on local issues, and just a few points that seem to have come out for me from Rajesh's initial presentation about the importance of localism and local knowledge, local expertise, and capitalizing that and working in localities, which again was emphasized a little bit later when Kaustav spoke about data-driven approaches and constant engagement with communities. And there I took it to mean that we should be engaging with our colleagues who are working on the ground, with citizens at every stage of the research process, from design through to implementation, so they play a role constantly. And I quoting from Andrea, something similar: be present in the community to weave the web like a spider. So I think you were speaking in very, very similar ways. And from South Africa, I picked up the very major issues that are there. And again, you were talking about working with communities, the context of mistrust and the need to build up relationships in that context. And I was greatly taken also by presentations from the presentation from Shanghai. I've had the pleasure of visiting Smile only a couple of years ago, and I know of the great things that you're doing in Shanghai in promoting lifelong learning. And if I'd had time, I would have asked Catherine to pose a question of what we can learn from you about your approaches to community development and community education. It's a big topic for us, and Catherine can confirm the fact that we have a very large group of colleagues who are working with the community here in Glasgow. So when you talk about community development and community education, it's something very close to our hearts. So thanks to all of you, to Rajesh, to Andrea, to Diana, Darren, Kaustav, Kristan, Jiansheng, for your presentations. Thank you to UIL and Konstantinos working behind the scenes to put all of this together, which is always difficult. And he's done that admirably today. And thanks, of course, to Raul, who has been working very cooperatively with us and everybody else at UIL. And last but not least, of course, to Catherine, who you probably don't recognize. Last time she did this, she was a brunette. This time she's a blonde. But it is the same person, and she's done an excellent job once again. So thank you all. And can I just say to you that the final webinar in this series will be happening in December, the 16th of December, where our focus will be health. So thank you. Like Catherine said, if anybody wants to stay online and chat with anyone and has the time, we can keep things open. But formally, this is the end of the webinar for today. As someone said to me, it was only 2 hours ago that he last saw me in a webinar. So I won't stay with you because I have to go to another one in about 30 minutes. So thank you and have a very good morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you might be. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Well done.